Book 3, A Lady of His Own. Restormel Abbey, Lostwithiel, Cornwall, April 1816. Crack! A log shattered in the grate, sparks sizzled and flew. Flames leaped, sending fingers of light playing over the leather spines lining the library walls. Charles St. Austell, Earl of Lostwithiel, lifted his head from the padded depths of his armchair and checked that no embers had reached the shaggy pelts of his wolfhounds, Cassius and Brutus. Slumped in hairy mounds at his booted feet, neither hound twitched, neither was smoldering. Lips easing, Charles let his head roll back on the well-worn leather. Raising the glass in hand, he sipped and returned to his cogitations. It was a good time to take stock. He was there on a mission, but that was largely incidental. Learning whether there was any truth in the tales of the Foreign Office secrets being run through local smuggling channels wasn't likely to tax him. Certainly not on a personal level. His principal objective in seizing the excuse his erstwhile commander Desille had created, and thus returning to the Abbey, his ancestral home, now his, was to gain sufficient perspective to examine, and he prayed resolve, the increasingly fraught clash between his desperate need for a wife and his deepening pessimism over finding a lady suitable to fill the position. In London, he'd found himself hip deep in candidates, not one of whom was anything like the lady he needed, being mobbed by giddy young misses with more hair than wit, who viewed him only as a handsome and wealthy nobleman with the added cachet of being mysterious war hero, had proved something of a personal purgatory. He wasn't going back into society until he had a firm and definite vision of the lady he wanted for his own. Truth to tell, the depth of his need for a wife, the right wife, unnerved him. When he first returned after Waterloo, he'd been able to assure himself that need was only natural. His association with 6 others so very like himself, all equally in need of wives, and the camaraderie that had flowed through their formation of the Bastion Club, their last bastion against the matchmaking mamas of the ton, had reassured and soothed his impatience and blunted the spur for some months. Your Bastion Club members: Christian ALLARDYCE, Marquis of DEARNE; Anthony Blake, Viscount Torrington; JOCELYN DEVERELL, Viscount PAIGNTON; Charles Austell, Earl of Lothwell; Gervase TREGARTH, Earl of CROWHURST; Jack Warnefleet, Baron Warnefleet of Minchinbury; and TRISTAN WEMYSS, Earl of TRENTHAM. Those are your, what's the first one? Here. Here is your Bastion Club members. Sorry, the glare. See if I can get it out of the glare a little. I don't know how much that'll help. But anyways, let's see. Both now Tristan WEMYSS and Tony Blake had both found and secured their wives, while he, with his more edgy, restless, desperate need, was still waiting for his lady to appear. It had taken the last few weeks in London, being sucked into the world as society prepared for the intense months of the season, to comprehend fully what had fed that increasingly edgy need. For 13 years he'd been dislocated, cut off from society to which he'd been born and to which he now returned. He'd spent 13 tense years buried in enemy territory, never relaxing, never less than alert and aware. Now, even though he knew he was home and the war was over, he still found himself at parties, balls, and any large gatherings mentally apart. Still the disguised outsider watching, observing, never able to let down his guard and freely merge. He needed a wife to connect him again, to be a bridge between him and all around him, especially in society. He was an earl, with numerous sisters, relatives, connections, and obligations. He couldn't hide himself away. He didn't want to hide himself away. He constitutionally unsuited to be a recluse. He liked parties, balls, dancing. He liked people and jokes and having fun. Yet at present, even though he might be standing in the middle of a ballroom surrounded by laughing hordes, he still felt he was on the outside. They say that you can be in Manhattan, in the streets of Manhattan, surrounded by millions and millions of people, and still be alone. They couldn't even see him clearly, let alone understand him, and he wasn't at all sure they had any real interest in the latter. The notion of marriage, of the relationship underlying the state, seemed determinedly and unalterably fixed in the superficial, which to his mind came perilously close to a deception, to pretense. After 13 years of lying, both living a lie and constantly dealing in fabrication, the last thing he would permit to touch his life, his real life, the one he was determined to reclaim, was any element of deceit. Fixing his gaze on the flames leaping in the hearth, he focused his mind on his objective, on finding the right lady. The sound of footsteps, faint but definite, reached him. He blinked, listened. He dismissed the staff for the night. They'd gone to their beds long ago. Boots, not shoes. The boot step marched nearer and nearer from the rear of the house. By the time the steps reached the back of the hall, not far from the library, he knew that whoever was strolling through his house after midnight wasn't any servant. No servant walked with that relaxed, assured tread. Cassius and Brutus knew more than he. They knew who the person was. Straightening in his chair, he set his glass aside, almost disbelievingly listened as the intruder rounded the end of the stairs and calmingly, steadily calmed them. What the hell? Raising his frown at the wolfhounds, wishing they would communicate, he pointed at them and said, "Stay!" The next minute he was at the library door, easing it open. Unlike the person marching through his house, he made much less noise. Lady Penelope Jane Marcia Selborne reached the head of the stairs without conscious thought. She turned her riding boots to the left along the gallery, making for the corridor at the end. She hadn't bothered with a candle. She didn't need one. She walked this way countless times over the years. Tonight the shadow of the galleries and the peaceful silence of the abbey itself were balm to her restless, uncertain mind. What the devil was she to do? More to the point, what was going on? She felt an urge to run, her hand through her hair, to loosen the long strands streaked back in a tight knot. But she was still wearing her wide-brimmed hat. Dressed in breeches and an old hacking jacket, she spent the day, all of the evening, surreptitiously following and watching the activities of her distant cousin, Nicholas Selborne, Viscount Aubrey. Nicholas was the only son of the Marquise of Amberley, who, after her brother Granville's death, had inherited her home, Wallingham Hall, a few miles away. While she felt respect and mild affection for Amberley, who she'd met on a number of occasions, she was less sure of Nicholas. When in February he appeared unheralded to stay at Wallingham and started asking questions about Granville's habits and associates, she grew suspicious. She had sound reasons for believing that anyone asking questions bore careful watching, but Nicholas had left after 5 days, and she'd hoped that would be the end of it. Yesterday, Nicholas had returned and spent all day visiting the various smugglers' dens dotted along the coast. Tonight he visited Polram and spent 2 hours at the tavern there. She spent the same 2 hours watching from a nearby strand of trees. Taverns at night being one of the few places hereabouts she accepted were off limits to her, at least when she was on her own. During her long wait in the trees, she thought of a way to learn what Nicholas had been doing in the taverns. He visited, but putting her plan into action would have to wait for tomorrow, as would racking her brain yet again to try and make sense of what she learned thus far, of her suspicion and what she feared they might mean, might reveal, might lead to. At the end of the gallery, she headed down the corridor. The bedchamber, too, from end of the wing had been hers from the past decade. Whenever she took it into her head to visit her godmother's home, the room was always kept ready. The Abbey staff used to her occasional unheralded appearances. The fire would be laid but not lit. Glancing to her right through the long, uncertain window that gave onto the rear courtyard with its fountain and well-tended beds, she decided she wouldn't bother striking a flame. She was bone weary. All she wanted was to peel off her breeches and boots, jacket and shirt, and tumble under the covers and sleep. A large, dense shadow swooped in on her left. Panic leap. She looked. Eee! Recognition hit. She clapped a hand over her mouth to cut off her shriek, but he was faster. Her hand landed over his, pressing his hard palm to her lips. For an instant she stared into those eyes, dark and unreadable, mere inches away, acutely conscious of the heat of his skin against his lips. Oh! Oh! The heat! He touched me! You gotta love these Regencies. If time could stand still, in that instant it did. Then reality came crashing back. Stiffening, she dropped her hand and stepped back. Lowering his hand, he let her go, eyes narrowing as he searched her face. She dragged in a breath, kept her eyes on his. Her heart was still hammering in her throat. Damn you, Charles! What the devil do you mean by trying to scare me witless? The only way to deal with him was to seize the reins and keep them. You could at least have spoken or made some sound. One dark brow arched, his eyes lifted to her hat, then lazily traced down all the way to her boots. I didn't realize it was you. The realization that he was the very last person she wished to be there, within 10 miles or even more of there, slammed through her and shook her to her toes. Well, it is, and now if you don't mind, I'm going to get some sleep. Lifting the latch, she pushed open the door, went in and shut it. Tried to. The door stopped 4 inches short of the jamb. He'd put his foot in it! All right. Stepping away, she flung her hands in the air. Be difficult, then. Tired as she was, her hold on her temper was tenuous. That she knew was the worst state to be in when forced to deal with Charles Maximilian Geoffrey St. Austell. He saw her brushes on the dresser, glanced at the armoire, noting the pair of half-boots she left under it. Then he looked at the bed, confirming it was made up, all in the time it took him to prowl, long-legged, arrogantly assured, to the armchair before the window. His gaze returned to her. He sat. Not that the word adequately described the motion. He was all fluid grace, somehow arranging long, muscled limbs, inherently masculine and intimately elegant scrawl. For the space of 10 heartbeats, his gaze rested on her. Even though the dimness, she could feel it. He always had better night vision than she. If she was to survive this interview with her secrets intact, she needed every last ounce of control. What are you doing home? All her reasons for believing the Abbey empty, a safe haven, colored the words, transforming questions in an accusation. I live here, remember? Yes, but Marissa, Jacqueline, and Lydia and Annabelle and Helen went to London to help find you a wife. My stepmother, your godmother, and my sisters are there too. They left there enthused in full flight. There's been talk of little else in the drawing rooms here and at Wallingham since Waterloo. You're supposed to be there, not here. Do they know you're here? They know I had to come down. Had to? Why? She still appeared as he remembered, tall, lithe, slender, a fair slips who, despite her outward delicacy, had always had his measure. I'm on business. What business? Estate business. I'll be attending to whatever's on my desk while I'm here. But you're here for some other reason? But if she was talking, then his most direct way forward was to tell her, and see how she'd react. He wanted quid pro quo. What the devil was she doing traipsing about the countryside at night, let alone dressed as a male? Unhurriedly he stood, his gaze on her. He walked unthreatening as he could to the bed and propped one shoulder against the post at its end. Her gaze hadn't left him. He looked into her eyes. "I'll tell you exactly why I'm here. If in return you'll explain to me exactly why, you arrived at this hour dressed like that." He caught up with her on the stairs and followed her to the kitchen. She marched in and went straight to the kettle, left sitting to one side of the hob, taking it to pump over the sink. She started filling it. Crossing to the stove, he hunkered down, opened the furnace door, and riddled the grate until the coals glowed red. He piled in kindling, then split a few logs, conscious of the sharp, assessing glances she threw him as she moved through the room. "Why are you here?" Leaning back, resting the law of the biscuits for the moment, he studied her. If he answered simply, succinctly, what were his chances of getting anything out of her? "My erstwhile commander asked me to look around here." Where to go from here? He could see the question in her blue eyes and could only wonder why she was being so very careful. "Your commander? What arm of the services were you in, Charles?" Very few people knew. Neither the Army nor the Navy. Which regiment? Theoretically, one of the guards. In reality, if he didn't tell her, she wouldn't understand the rest. "Where were you for all those years?" "To Lucy." "With your mother's relatives?" "They're from Landys, a similar distance, so my coloring and accent were acceptable, but far enough away for me to be relatively safe from being recognized." "You were a spy?" He steeled himself so didn't flinch, an unofficial agent of His British Majesty's government. She turned back to him, her gaze searched his face. She rubbed her hands down her breeches and slowly sat again. This time she leaned forward. The candlelight reached her eyes. "All those years?" He hadn't until that moment known how she'd react, whether she'd be horrified by the dishonor many considered spying to be, or whether she'd understand. She understood. Her horror was for him, not over what he'd been doing. A massive weight lifted from his shoulders. "Well, someone had to do it." "I was recruited as soon as I joined the Guards." "You were only 20." "I was also half French, looked completely French, spoke like a Southern native. I could so easily pass for French, and I was ripe for any madness." "But back then it was easy to slip into France. Within a few months I was established, just another French businessman in Toulouse. You look and act too aristocratic. Your arrogance would always mark you." I gave it out that I was a bastard of a by then extinct family on whose grave I would happily dance. "All right, and then you did what?" "I wormed my way into the good graces of every military and civilian dignitary there, gathering whatever information I could." "So you sent the information back, but you stayed there all the time?" "Yes." "So that's why you didn't come back for James's funeral?" "I managed to get back for Papa's and Frederick's, but when James was lost, Wellington forces were closing in on Toulouse. It was more vital than ever that I stay in place. Frederick, his eldest brother, had broken his neck on the hunting field. James, the second oldest, had succeeded Frederick only to drown in a freaking boat accident. He, Charles, was the third son of the 6th Earl, yet here he now was proclaimed and established as the 9th Earl, one of the vicissitudes of fortune that had overtaken him." "Where were you at Waterloo?" "Behind French lines. I led a few others half French like me to an attachment from Toulouse. They were guarding artillery on a hill overlooking the field." "You stopped the cannons?" "That's why we remained there, to reduce the slaughter of our troops." By slaughtering others, he left the words unsaid. "But after Waterloo, you sold out." "There was no further need of us, agents like me, and I had other duties waiting." "Duties you and everyone else had never imagined you'd have taken up." "How does it feel being the Earl?" she asked. "Odd," he said. "I find it hard remembering Flitch and Crew are trying to get my attention when they say my lord." Flitch and Crew were his butlers, here and in town respectively. He told her enough. He drained his cup, intending to start his side of the interrogation. "I heard you and some others had formed a special club to help each other in your search for brides. Have you been to London recently?" "Not for 7 years. How the hell did you know? She sat down. Marissa had it from Lady Amory. Tony Blake's mother and godmother were French, part of the network of aristocratic emigres who'd come to England the year before the Terror, as was his mother. He frowned. She didn't tell me she knew. She and the rest only went up to town 4 weeks ago. How much time have you spent with her? I've been busy. He'd been actively avoiding not so much his mother. She understood him so well it was frightening, but consequently she rarely attempted to tell him his business. But his younger sisters, Jacqueline and Liddy, and even more his sisters-in-law, Frederick's wife, Annabella, and James and Helen. Their husbands had died without heirs. For some mystical reason that converted them into the most passionate advocates of marriage for him. They'd infected his sisters with the same zeal. Every time any of the four of them saw him, they'd drop names. He didn't dare go riding or strolling in the park for fear of being set on and dragged to the pretty by some witless, spineless miss they thought perfect to fill his countess' shoes. Have they driven you from town? Penny watched his head come up, watched his eyes. She held his gaze. I did warn them, Elaine and my sisters too. Much they know. It's the start of a season, the very first week, and you've already fled. Indeed. But enough of me. What are you doing riding about the countryside dressed like that? A flick of his eyes eradicated her unconventional attire. It was easier than riding in skirts, especially at night. No doubt, but why were you riding at night and sufficiently hard to appreciate the difference between saddle and astride? I was following someone. Someone doing what? I don't know. That's why I was following him. Who is he and where'd he go? You said you were asked to look around here by your ex-commander. What sort of ex-commander does an ex-spy have? Dizale is something in Whitehall. Exactly what, I've never known. He's commanded all British agents on foreign soil for the last 13 years at least. What has he asked you to look into? What do you know about it? He looked at her. I have to get some sleep. Penny! She pushed back her chair but made the mistake of looking up and meeting his eyes. Oh! They gaze into each other's eyes and think of lustful thoughts. Holding his gaze, she stood. I can't tell you, not yet. I need to think. She reached the doorway and silently exhaled. Man Eng! She froze. He called her that only one occasion. His threat was there in his tones, unspoken yet unmistakable. She waited a heartbeat. When he said nothing more, she looked back. He hadn't moved. He was looking at the candle. He didn't turn to face her. He couldn't face her. A knot inside unraveled. Tension flowed away. She smiled softly, knowing he couldn't see. Don't bother. There's no point. I know you, remember? You're not the sort of man who would. Good night. He didn't reply, didn't move. She turned and walked away down the corridor. Charles listened to her footsteps retreating and wondered what malevolent fate had decreed he'd face this. Not the sort of man to blackmail a lady. Much she knew. He'd been exactly such a man for more than a decade. Damn! Shoving away from the table, he stood and stalked back to the library. Opening the door, he called Cassius and Brutus, then headed out to the ramparts to walk. He let the breeze blow the cobwebs and memories from his brain. He didn't need them clouding his judgment, especially now. The ramparts were raised, earthworks ringing the abbey's gardens to the south. He walked at first steering his thoughts to mundane things like the wolfhound lolloping around him, diverting to investigate scents, but always returning to his side. He'd gotten his first pair when he was 8 years old. They died of old age just months before he joined the Guards. Then he returned home 2 years ago with Napoleon exiled to Elba, and he got these two. But then Napoleon had escaped and he'd gone back in the field, leaving Cassius and Brutus in Lydia's care. Despite Lydia's affection, much to her disgust, the instant he reappeared, the hounds had reattached themselves to him. What was he going to do about Penny? The question was suddenly there in his mind, driving all else. Halting, he threw back his head, filled his lungs with the cool, tangy air, closed his eyes, and let all he knew of Penny, who was now flooded his mind. When he first returned home, his mother unprompted had informed him, presumably by the way of educating his ignorance of his neighbors, that Penny had not married. Hint, hint, hint. She'd had four perfectly successful London seasons. She was an earl's daughter, well dowered, and if not a diamond of the first water, then more passably pretty, with her delicate features, hair, unblemished skin, long flaxen hair, and stormy eyes. Then, too, there were the not inconsequential elements of her intelligence and her often whippish tongue. Neither bothered him, and indeed he greatly preferred them over the alternatives, but they were there. Penny had always challenged him, but in a way that delighted him. He appreciated and enjoyed her near constant battle of wits. Witness the one they were presently engaged in. Despite the seriousness of the situation, he was conscious of the past stirring, elements of their long ago association resurfacing, and part of what was the challenge of dealing with her, of interacting with her again. According to his mother, she received dozens of perfectly good offers, but had refused every one. When asked, she said none had filled her with any enthusiasm. She was apparently happily living as she had for the past 7 years in Cornwall, watching over the family's estate. She was the only offspring of the late Earl of Wallington's first marriage. Her mother had died when she was very young. Her father had remarried and sired one son and 3 daughters by his second wife. Elaine, a goodly-hearted lady, his godmother, as a matter of fact, she'd taken Penny under her wing. They'd grown to be not so much mother and daughter as close friends. The Earl had died 5 years ago. Penny's half-brother Granville had succeeded to the title, a sole male with a doting mother and 4 sisters. Granville had always been spoiled, tumbling from one escape into the next, with nary a thought for one or anything immediate beyond gratification. He last met Granville when he was home in 14. Granville had been reckless and wild. Then had come Waterloo. Fired by the prevailing patriotic frenzy, Granville shut his ears to his mother's and sister's pleas and joined one of the regiments. He'd fallen somewhere on that bloody plain. The title had passed to a distant cousin, the Marquess of Amberley, an older gentleman who assured Elaine and his daughters that they would continue to live as they always had at Wallington Helm. Amberley had been close to the previous Earl, Penny's father, and had been Granville's guardian prior to Granville obtaining his majority, and thus the freedom to get himself killed, leaving his mother and sisters, if far from destitute, then without immediate protectors. That, Charles decided, opening his eyes and starting peace again, was what bothered him most. Here was Penny already involved in God knew what, and there wasn't any male in the position to watch over her. How did she feel about that? He didn't know. But he's there now, and he's going to watch over her now. He did know how he felt about her. That had been an unwelcome surprise. He thought 13 years would have dulled his bewitchment, but it hadn't. Not in the least. Since he left to join the army, he'd seen her a few times in 14, and then again over the past 6 months, but always at a distance with family, both his and hers, all around. Nothing remotely private. Tonight he'd come upon her unexpectedly alone in his house, and the desire came ranging back. Had caught him, snared him, sunk in his talents, and had shaken him. Regardless, it was unlikely there was anything he could do to ease the ache. She'd finished with him 13 years ago, cut him off. He knew better than to hold his breath, hoping she'd change her mind. She always had been unbelievably stubborn. They would have to set part of their past aside. They couldn't entirely ignore it if it affected both of them too intensely, but they could if they had to work around it. So he slowly decides that she's for him, and it takes a while. They have to investigate the smuggling ring. They have to investigate what's going on in town. So we have a little bit of mystery going on with the love story. It always helps to have a little bit of mystery going on besides just the relationship angst. So they're both investigating, and they get together and they do some investigating, and they become a team, and they grow closer, and we get the romance. So to find out how that all works out, you'll have to check out the book. So, excuse me. We started with The Lady Chosen, and where's the other one? A Gentleman's Honor was book 2. Book 3, A Lady of His Own, and next week A fine passion to distraction, beyond seduction, the edge of desire, and Dezeal is revealed in Master by Love. And please hit the like and subscribe, please. And please continue to check out other videos on the D. Louise Book Series channel. Have a good day.